As a writer, one of the worst questions you can ever be asked is, where'd you get your ideas? So that's what we're talking about today. The question is well intentioned because sometimes people can't imagine how you put together various elements to create a story. And as someone who's been traditionally published since 2015, and I've been writing for 20 plus years before that, people who aren't writers struggle to understand how you can fit concepts together and create a story, or start with a seed of an idea and developing it into a full story with world building and characters and magic and all of these things overlapping. Now, there isn't any great magic to it. It's just like if I look at a painting, I can't do some of the things they can do, and I can't get my head around how you'd even start to do it because it's something just so alien to me. But nevertheless, the question persists. And it is an annoying question in some ways because the answer is everywhere, which isn't really helpful. But I'm going to try and dig down a little bit more on what I actually mean when I say that. There is no right or wrong way to come up with a story and developing it. Some people start with a particular scene between two characters. It could be a bit of dialogue. It could be that you just have a seed of an idea that's a question, and then from that grows any number of other ideas. It could be that you watched a bunch of stuff and it all swirls together in your head and then it creates the new series, which is what's happened with my new series that's coming out soon. Time for a little plug. Look, it's a limited edition proof, an uncorrected proof of the Judas Blossom, the first book in my new series coming out from Angry Robot on the 11th of July. It's set in 13th century Persia and it's historic fantasy. And that one came from lots of different places. There wasn't one single idea that led me to go to that story. Obviously, I had an interest in that era. I'd watched other things that had fed into it and read other things. So I've got a stack of books on my shelf that I was reading about Mongols. I'd read the stuff of Marco Polo. I watched the Netflix series, and that's also set within the 13th century. And all of these things kind of swirled around in my brain. And from thinking about that and thinking about fantasy in general, it is getting a lot more diverse. People want own voices. People want non-Western fantasy. They're interested in seeing stories from other points of view. It's not that there isn't room for something like that. It's not that those things are tired. But if it's the same kind of thing and it's the same starting point, then it can become a little boring for some readers. So even if the origin of the story is very different and the first scene and the first chapter and the setup is so different, then it'll feel quite fresh, and that's what I was hoping for. My initial thought was, there is no Persian-inspired historical fantasy. There's historical fiction, and there's Mongol historical fiction. Con Igulden has done great stories about that, sort of retelling sections of the history of the Mongols about Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan. The Netflix series Marco Polo dealt with some of that when Kublai was the great Khan and Marco Polo was in his court. And from having read the books, I know that some of the events are true. Who happened to be there and the order in which it happened isn't true. He's moved things around, the guy who created the TV show, to make it fit. But the bare bones, the kind of structure is there. But when you watch the series, it's not something that I would know, or most people would just know automatically, be like, oh, with King Arthur, yeah, we know there's the sword and the lady in the lake and Lancelot, yeah, okay, let's see what the different kind of twist is on this. It's nothing like that. You sit down and watch Marco Polo, unless you know the history, or you're from that part of the world, and it's part of your kind of upbringing and education, you have no idea what's coming. And that's the exciting part. Readers don't know what to expect. And so that's my challenge in a way, was to take all of these different elements, all of these ideas that I've had, moments from history within this period, characters, add new stuff on top, add some fantastic elements, and create a story that no one would be able to predict. And even if you're familiar with that part of history and you've studied it, reading my book, it's not a retelling. It's not meant to be a historic retelling. It has the word fantasy on the spine. It's going to annoy some historians, but that's fine. It's not for them. It's a fictional idea springboarded from history. That's what I'm doing. I should mention that the trilogy, it's going to be a trilogy of books, starts in July for the next 3 years. It's called The Nightingale and the Falcon, and it's available to pre-order now. There's a link down below. Please check it out. Another kind of story idea that people are doing at the moment, that's been going on for a while, that's very popular, is retellings with a twist. So growing up, I read lots of myths and legends, and I was told lots of stories, Hans Christian Andersen, Grimm's fairy tales, and all these kind of things. And we all know about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and all these kind of things. But what if you take those core stories and put a different twist? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean a modern twist. It means something different. So, as far as I know, this one hasn't been done. I just come up with this now. What if Snow White wasn't someone who, was taken in by these dwarves and cares for them and looks after them and something? What if she was like an escapee from something, and these 7 grisly ogres or 7 grisly dwarfs who are really nasty capture her and make her a house slave, and to serve them their meals and look after them and clean and wash for them, and the story is about her trying to escape from them. It's just taking some familiar elements and doing something completely different. Therefore, it's not just a modern retelling where Snow White is a 21st century woman with a 21st century modern ideals. Even if you look at something really ridiculous that Disney did with something like Shrek, then, that's the idea of a troll and an ogre, not a troll. Oh God, I'm going to get emails about that one. An ogre, but you look at the world at which Shrek is set, there's all the different fairy tales that overlap. So you've got the gingerbread men and the 3 little pigs who talk in German accent, and Red Riding Hood and the wolf and Cinderella, and all these other things that kind of mix together. And it creates a fun background to then tell this story that no one knew was coming, no one knew existed. It wasn't anywhere there about an ogre with a slightly Scottish accent from Mike Myers. No one saw that coming. But, it's a fun story based upon familiar things. But when you go in and someone says, oh, let's watch Shrek, you're like, well, what's that about? There's nothing that you can pull on that will give you the answers because it didn't exist. Some stories start with a strong emotion, something that has happened to you as an individual, something that you've gone through, an experience. And, I obviously write fantasy, but looking at more broadly at fiction, there's all sorts of things that happen to a person over the course of their life at any age that can create stories and ideas. It could be that something that's happened to you in childhood, not necessarily a bad thing, it could be a good thing. I remember when I was a kid, summer holidays in the UK last for 6 weeks, and they felt like they went on forever, the break between school years. And you get up to all sorts of adventures and have fantastic times with your friends and just felt so free, and it felt like it went on for months, and it was wonderful. It could be a fantastic, very gentle story about someone having a lovely beach holiday and discovering caves and, a bit of a mystery to the treasure hunt or whatever it might be. Doesn't always have to be life and death. Doesn't always have to be the world is at stake and that kind of thing. Those stories are great, but sometimes people just want to pick up a nice book, have a cozy read, something they enjoy, something they can just sit by a pool or in the back garden or on a train and just hug up to a book and feel nice. Legends and Lattes was a very popular fantasy series. The first book's just come out from Travis Baldree, and that's described as a cozy fantasy book. It's about, I think it's an orc who has basically given up her life of being an adventurer and decides to open a tavern with serving coffee. And no one's ever heard of coffee and what it is, but she's opening this tavern/coffee shop. And it's, apparently there is some drama within that, but equally it's a very gentle story. And it's not going to stick with you for the rest of your life and you'll be thinking, oh, the stakes in that story, when she tried to serve that first latte, oh no. I haven't read it, clearly. But that's what everyone says when they talk about the book. And people love it. It was very popular because it was very different and it was very gentle and very nice. And sometimes nice is good. Some stories do come from much darker places. Trauma or, pain, something like that. Think about Conan and the story of his life in the books, and with the film from Schwarzenegger where he's a slave who's captured, becomes fighting in the pits, and eventually he's so good that he's released and becomes this great adventurer and warrior travelling across the world and fighting monsters and all this kind of stuff. And great stories, different again, came from an awful place, a terrible childhood, trauma, but an interesting story. My favourite science fiction book of all time is Dune by Frank Herbert. And Denis Villeneuve has recently been making it into a movie. We've had half of the film, which is half of the book, and the second part is coming out later this year. And it is the best adaptation of the book that's ever been done. And I like the original sci-fi miniseries that was done. It's just fantastic. The film is perfect. But If someone had said to me, go away and write something like Dune, I would really struggle, because Frank Herbert was into all sorts of different things that are fed into that book. If you study it not from a story perspective, but look at what potentially could have influenced it, and you go and look into his biology, then you can see obviously he had an interest in ecology. There's a lot of stuff in there to do with environment. There's a lot of stuff to do with the Middle East and people living in the desert, and the languages and some of the words used in that book come from the Middle East. There's a huge thing to do with mysticism in that book, and religion with the Bene Gesserits. There's all the stuff to do with resurrection and warriors and past lives and future lives. There's stuff in there to do with genetic engineering on some levels. There's the idea of technology and AI being potentially disruptive and dangerous, because they don't have that anymore, because in the past, before Dune's set, something happened with AI and they stopped using it essentially, so that they don't have any advanced technology to that level. So societies had to adapt in a way for interstellar travel. How did they get around it? So all of these different elements were swirling around in his brain, and from that he created Dune. Trying to replicate something like that is impossible, but you have a number of different things in your brain, a number of ideas, a number of interests that I don't share. I'm into computer games and archery and craft beer and, science fiction and fantasy and Star Wars and Star Trek, and maybe I'll write a science fiction book one day about a guy who opens a craft beer shop in a canteen in an equivalent of Mos Eisley. I don't know, maybe. And in hobbies he has archery in the background. I don't know, maybe I'll do that something one day, maybe I won't. But it's all these little things that I am interested in. So what things are you really interested in? What things do you like? What things do you know quite a lot about that you want to put into your stories and integrate them? So you don't want to be just lecturing someone about the ins and outs of coin collecting and stamp collecting and why it's so fascinating. I'm sure it is for some people, it's not for me. But what is it that you love? And if you're writing something that you love, which hopefully is every book that you do, and yes, there are struggles, I struggle with every book and it's ups and downs and blah, blah, blah. But if it's something that you love and you can inject into your story, it will shine through. The readers will notice, potential agents will notice, potential editors will notice, because you're writing with passion. And that's what people want to see in any book that they pick up. This is fast becoming my mantra, but it's worth repeating. Editors and agents aren't looking for the next J.K. Rowling, the next Tolkien, the next George R. Martin. They want the first you, the first person of your particular variety who comes in with ideas that are a little bit different to everybody else. That hopefully everyone falls in love with your stories and thinks, this is fantastic, I love this, we want more of this. And then you do more books and more books and more books, and you grow and become a massive name. So they don't want you to be like someone else. They want you to be as popular as all of the big names you can wheel out, whoever you want to name. They want someone who's fresh and different and has unique perspectives, and that's you. You're different to me and him and her and him and everybody else. That's what they want. So, where do you get your ideas from? The answer is your brain, everything you've seen, everything you've read, played, every conversation, random thoughts that pop into your head, anything, jot them down, put them in a book, file them away. May never use them, you may do. Dean Koontz, who's a famous thriller writer, has been writing for 40 plus years at this point, he's a contemporary of Stephen King. He gets ideas, and in the past what he said he used to do is, something comes to him. He gets a note card, he writes it down, files it away. When he comes to write the next book, he takes out his box of file cards, goes through them, looks for something that sparks his interest from whenever he wrote it down, goes, oh, that's quite an interesting seed of an idea. Okay. He takes it out, and he starts writing that book. That's how he chooses his next book. That's how he comes up with his ideas. Come up with your own method, whatever it might be, but put the ideas down, give them time to rest, because every idea when you first come up with it, at least with me, feels brilliant and fantastic, but with time and a bit of distance, it's a case of coming up with ideas is easy. How do I turn that idea into an interesting story that's different? How do I make that something else? Because you have to spend months, potentially years, working on that idea to make it into a cohesive novel. That takes time. That's a marathon, not a sprint. Have fun, come up with some great ideas, go out there and tell fantastic stories. That's what I'm going to talk about today. I'll be back very soon with another video.